Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle, and above me here on the screen, as always, is my co-host Joe Clark. And we're coming at you on Tuesday because Joe is headed down to Frisco, Texas for the Shrine Bowl, as he has been there. What is this, year 4, 5, something like that for you?
This is going to be year 4.
Year 4 at the Shrine Bowl. And I'm going to be headed to the Senior Bowl on Monday, a little bit after that. So we wanted to hop on and make sure we got a preview for each of those two events and also an update on the Steelers head coach search, which is, of course, the main thing dominating the news cycle right now. Joe, besides the football, what's one thing you look forward to down in Frisco? Is there a restaurant you guys kind of go to, or do you have a kind of routine carved out down there?
And this year is going to be a little bit different because the schedule's changing. So usually the game's on Thursday. This year the game's on Tuesday. There used to be one restaurant we would hit on Tuesday nights. We still haven't made it down to Hutchins, which is supposed to be some of the best barbecue down there. Um, but yeah, no, I just like being down there. It's a good atmosphere. Um, you know, pretty good vibes. It's cool. Just there's a ton of former players around. Because the NFLPA is a pretty big hand. They run a bunch of events down there, so it's just a fun atmosphere. Just being down there. Everything's kind of since it's been in Frisco is in one basically like block more or less because we stay super close to the Cowboys facility, which is where obviously they practice, and where the game is going to be held this year. So it's fun. It's a cool atmosphere. It's a good time.
Well, we'll get to the All-Star Game primers here in a second. First, we're going to talk about the coach process for the Steelers. There's been several updates since we last spoke to you guys on Thursday. Things have been moving fast. The Steelers announced a full list of candidates that they did virtual interviews with, and I believe that list was 7 names. There's another 2 that were separately reported by credible, national insider types. So I guess I'll just list off first of all, the virtual guys. That was Nate Scheelhaus, the pass game coordinator of the LA Rams, Chris Shula, the defensive coordinator of the LA Rams, Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator of the LA Chargers, Jeff Hafley, who has since been hired to the Miami Dolphins, so we won't really talk about him, Clay Kubiak, the offensive coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers, Anthony Weaver, the defensive coordinator of the Miami Dolphins, and Ejiro Evero, I hope I didn't butcher that, the defensive coordinator of the Carolina Panthers. And so those are the 7 that the Steelers officially announced. And then, of course, there are the 2 others, those being Brian Flores, the former Steelers assistant, linebacker coach there, but most recently the defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings. And the one that everybody's talking about over the last 48 hours, Mike McCarthy, the former head coach of both the Green Bay Packers for a long time, beat the Steelers in a Super Bowl, and also, most recently, the Dallas Cowboys. He's by far the oldest name on the list and breaks basically every precedent that we know about the Steelers head coach search in the past. So, Joe, what can you make of it? I mean, what's the latest buzz on Mike McCarthy? What do you think of that situation? And is he a serious... I mean, can you see a world where he's the guy?
I mean, I would be really, really surprised if he was the guy. I mean, the fact he's getting an in-person interview, you can't completely rule it out. And he has ties to Pittsburgh. He obviously has ties to Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I'm at the point right now, if you're making your head coach hire, though, just to bring back Aaron Rodgers for another season, that's a grave mistake. Obviously, if they hire McCarthy, that wouldn't be the lone reason, but it would be a factor. Um, yeah, I mean, his ties to the city, the fact he has been a successful head coach, it makes sense that he's getting a look, but hiring a 62-year-old coach who would now be on his 3rd team just doesn't really do a whole lot for me. I would much rather take a chance with one of the other guys that they have on their list. But yeah, I mean, obviously McCarthy's gotten a lot of buzz just because his name popped up early Sunday morning, and his agent has seemed to be feeding the insiders a lot of information these last few days because he's been the most tweeted about candidate. We've gotten like 4 updates on when he's going to interview and what the deal is going to be with him. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be thrilled if he was the hire, to be completely honest. No offense to him, but I just think there's better options out there and better candidates for where this team is at and where they need to be going forward.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I know Jeff Halfley was Alex's favorite guy, but to me at 46, that was even a little too old for my liking. And, not to come off as ageist or whatever, but I think there's something to be said about a young guy who's, hungry and maybe more open to, ceding control of offense and defense to talented coordinators, guys that come from these backgrounds like, Shieldhouse and Shula under McVay right now, Kubiak under Shanahan. They would have access to big kind of assistant coaching trees, if you will, of talented guys that have been in close proximity to some of the best coaches in the league. And so that was I personally kind of trend towards the younger guys a little bit more. And so when you introduce a Mike McCarthy who's 62 years old, that is just absurd to me. I mean, what's he going to give you? Like, do you really want this guy into his 70s based on the Steelers' trends of the past? And if not, I mean, are they really going to break precedent and kind of hire a stopgap guy? Is that what you want at head coach? That would be like the least exciting thing ever. I think one thing that does need to be talked about is the Aaron Rodgers angle. And, Art Rooney II did say that with Tomlin gone, Rodgers is likely gone, but Rodgers did hint at potentially continuing to play. It seemed like players throughout the exit interview process were consistently telling the team that they want Rodgers back. Certainly, DK Metcalf made that very clear. I think even in one of his last media interviews made it clear that he wants Rodgers back. And so is there a situation where, McCarthy is the guy simply to lure Rodgers back? And I mean, to me, that's flawed thinking, but what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree, though. That's not really where this team should go. I mean, yes, players wanted Rodgers back, and Rodgers did a good job with the Steelers, and he comes back next year, you can maybe scrape together another team that can contend. But I don't really agree that this team needs to be bringing back Aaron Rodgers next season. I think you just kind of have to reset. And with Mike Tomlin stepping down and a new head coach, it presents you an easy opportunity to do so. And so this would just be taking a step back, in my opinion, if you went through this whole head coaching process just to try to scrape things together with a veteran quarterback and kind of just doing the same thing that they've done for the last couple of seasons that hasn't led to any playoff success.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth mentioning that he, at least reportedly, turned down other interview offers and pulled his name out of other, considerations specifically to focus on the Steelers' job. Again, that could just be, and likely is, just agent speak for my candidate wasn't wanted elsewhere. But, they did mention that specifically. I guess you have to take that into account at least a little bit. I think he really wants to be in Pittsburgh. I believe that part fully, just because of his ties to the area, of course. But I seem to be seeing a lot of speculation about would he come as an offensive coordinator? And I don't even know if, first of all, I don't know if I would want that. Second of all, would he even do such a thing after being a head coach for, God, as long as I can remember now at this point? He's been a head coach. And so I don't necessarily buy that angle of it either. I think I don't really know what to make of them bringing in McCarthy, other than maybe just they wanted to cast a wide net, and this is kind of saying, you could say, hey, we did cast a wide net. We brought in experience, we brought in youth, we brought in whatever. I guess that could be the angle there. But anything else on McCarthy before we move on?
No, I think we hit that pretty hard.
Other than McCarthy and Flores, who we mentioned as in-person interviews, Anthony Weaver, the Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator, is the only other in-person interview scheduled at the moment. So that's 3. And when the Steelers tweeted out that list of 7 virtual virtual interviews, they specifically stated that select candidates would be coming in for in-person visits, which is the implication that not all 7 of them will. Right now, we know of just one of the 7 that is reported to be. And then, of course, Halfley, his name's out of the hat. So that's one of the 6, which means there are 5 left. And right now, it's worth mentioning that Chris Shula and Nate Shieldhouse are not eligible to come to Pittsburgh until next week at the earliest because they're still in the playoffs. Joe, if you had to scratch a couple of names off there of those 6, assume, I mean, they're not going to bring in all six based on how they worded that. I wouldn't think so. I personally probably would have scratched off Weaver, but here he is with an in person. And do you have any sense of who should or maybe will be scratched off?
I only guess I could see a Vero being scratched off. Um, Maybe Minter. I like Minter a lot personally, but I could see him being scratched off. I mean, I think it's I would be shocked if Shula doesn't come in at some point, just because we had heard even before Mike Tomlin stepped down that the Steelers have been doing legwork on him. I could see Shieldhouse maybe being scratched off as a head coaching candidate if you think that maybe he could become an offense coordinator. Um, but my best guess for the two that probably would be Avero and then I guess Kubiak, just because no, he's not calling plays really under Kyle Shanahan, but he's in that scheme, and I think he's young. I think that was a pretty good interview request, and I was kind of intrigued by that one. But just based off the guys they've been targeting so far, I don't know how well he necessarily fits. Like him and I mean, I guess it's kind of would be one of him or Shieldhouse you could bring in. Um, but yeah, I don't have a great sense. Would have agreed with you on Weaver. But he is kind of, the CEO type of coach that the Steelers have seemed to gravitate toward and like. I mean, you watch his press conference, he's a true leader, and his players in Miami really like to play for him. He got, the best at it. He turned Jordan Brooks into, a linebacker, an all-pro worthy linebacker this season. Minka Fitzpatrick obviously had another strong season under him. He's gotten a lot out of some guys that haven't necessarily been thought to be some of the best players of their position, but he's turned them into talented players. So I understand him coming back, but I agree that before he got the in person, he's somebody that I would have more or less assumed wouldn't end up getting another interview. But yeah, I don't have a great idea, but I would guess Avero and Kubiak would probably be the top two. That wouldn't come back if I had to make a guess, but I it's kind of up in the air, I think.
Yeah, I think to me, Kubiak's one of my favorite, but I could see him getting scratched off just because, he's not the defensive guy. He doesn't have the experience. You could come up with reasons, certainly. I just like him because, the Steelers are about to embark on the most important thing over the next 5-10 years of Steelers football is finding, developing a franchise quarterback. And how many of the guys on this list have experience doing that? One, right? Well, two, I guess, if you want to count Mike McCarthy. So, he helped turn Brock Purdy from Mr. Irrelevant into Mr. 265 million or whatever. So that has to count for something. And yeah, maybe that's not the only thing that matters in a head coach. Certainly it's not. But to me, that was an attractive feature of Kubiak. So I'll be interested. He's one of the most interesting to me in terms of if they bring him in for an in-person, my interest will be piqued. But I could see him getting scratched off. Certainly. Now, with 9 total candidates, if that is the final list, did they cast a wide enough net? And do you think that they will add any of these Broncos or Seahawks guys late in the game? Potentially the Broncos, potentially either of them could be next week. The way things are trending, the Broncos, unfortunately, with Bo Nix injured, seems like next week's a pretty good bet for them to have their candidates available. But do you think any of those guys will be added?
Yeah, I just feel like it's kind of late in the process for them to add those guys. Those guys, a lot of them have gone through interviews of other teams like Davis Webb and Clint Kubiak. So I would be a little bit surprised if they got added just because the Steelers, at that point, they'll be through 2 interviews with Anthony Weaver at a minimum and probably more than that by the time the games wrap up on Sunday. So I think this probably is going to be the final list. I suppose Sean McDermott maybe gets a look. I'm not super interested in bringing him in, but Tom Pelissero said yesterday the Steelers could be a team to watch for him. So maybe he'll get a look. We don't know that as of right now, but if they cast as wide of a net as I thought, the answer is yes and no. I mean, if you told me going into this that they'd bring in 9 coaches for interviews, I'd say that's a pretty solid group. But the way the first day started out with rapid fire, we were getting news every 5 minutes that they're requesting somebody. At that point, I thought, oh, maybe they're gonna go like real deep here and interview, I don't know, 12, 15 guys. So after the first day, would I tell you I was surprised that they only ended up interviewing 9 as of right now? Then yes, but the day Mike Tomlin stepped down, I would have said that 9 to 10 is probably a pretty reasonable number to expect.
That's fair. How do you think the Bills opening, if at all, alters this thing? I mean, to me, it slows the whole search down, which, some people view it as, okay, the Steelers are now bumped down a peg in terms of desirability. And, you could certainly make that case with Lamar Jackson and now Josh Allen being on the market there for a head coach to work with. But I think there's other considerations for the jobs. I mean, all three of the Ravens, Steelers, and Bills have demonstrated continuity over the last decade plus. McDermott was there since 2017, I want to say, and of course, Harbaugh was there since 2008. And so you can't really say, oh, the Steelers have continuity over these other guys, but in Baltimore, your main job is getting along with and getting the most out of Lamar Jackson. And with the reports that just happened throughout this year of Jackson maybe being kind of malcontent and not great in that locker room, I don't know how much truth there is to it, but usually where there's smoke, there's at least some fire. And so that's one big thing that you have to grapple with if you're going to be the head coach there. Does that rule certain guys out who might not either gel with him or aren't up to the challenge of being, that kind of leader? Maybe. And on the other side with the Bills, to me, Brandon Beane has just got a promotion and has oversight over the coaching staff. How many head coaches want to deal with that type of scenario? Whereas Art Rooney II more or less said that the head coach in Pittsburgh would have relatively the same power structure as what Mike Tomlin did. And we all know that was very large power. With influence over the draft board and, who's getting retained free agent wise and all that kind of stuff. So to me, I wouldn't immediately say that it's the third most attractive on the list. I think that for certain coaches, you could argue that the Steelers are higher up, but anything to add to that, how the Bills might impact this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that it's going to slow things down. I think it's hard to say how much it'll truly impact it until we see their list of candidates and how much overlap there is. Because if you have a Chris Shula, maybe if he wanted to take the Bills job over the Steelers job, obviously that would impact things if he's a legitimate candidate. But at the same time, like, as you said, there's so many factors that go into it. I don't think you can automatically say the Bills job is definitely better than the Steelers job or vice versa. It'll kind of just depend on, the feel each team gets from the candidate and the feel each candidate gets from each team. So, the only thing that I think is really a definitive is that it will slow down this process a little bit as the Bills enter the fray here pretty late.
There's only one of those three teams that didn't fire their coach, and that is the Steelers, and that has to be counted for something. If you're a prospective head coach interviewing places, you go, dang, that guy got fired, Harbaugh got fired, McDermott got fired. Those guys are well respected, and if they got fired, how the heck am I going to hang on to a job here? So that would be my argument to people saying the Steelers are somehow not an attractive spot. I think they very much are for any head coach. Fully acknowledging the fact that it's going to be a pretty big process to get this thing turned around to where they need to be. But anyway, we're going to move into the All-Star Game portion of the show, and I'll start with the Senior Bowl. Like I said, I'll be down there I think this is my fourth year as well, so I guess we're in lockstep there. This year it'll be me and Nate Costco. Nate wrote profiles for us last year. Some of you probably recognize his name. He did a ton of profiles for us, so he did a great job on those. I'm excited to work with him. He was actually down there, so I met him in Mobile last year, but he was down there purely for networking purposes because he is I believe, a quality control coach at John Carroll, and all roads seem to lead back to John Carroll throughout this process. I think, who there just seems to be a lot. One of the coaches. Chris Shula. Yeah. Yep. Chris Shula was at John Carroll there under Tom Arth. And of course, Tom Arth was at John Carroll. And there's a lot of John Carroll connections. But that's beside the point. It'll be me and Nate down there. The Senior Bowl is going to look a lot different this year. For one, because Mike Tomlin used to be front and center in everything that happened in Mobile. He would literally be like standing right next to the position that you know, whatever position he's standing next to. It's like Groundhog Day. That's what the Steelers are going to end up drafting in the first round. Last year, he was breathing down the neck of the defensive line group in the positional drills, and lo and behold, the Steelers drafted a defensive lineman in the first round. And so no Tomlin, so it's going to be a little bit different in terms of maybe evaluating what the Steelers are interested in. You're not going to see Omar Khan standing that close to the drills, though. Omar Khan and Andy Weidel will, of course, be front and center at this thing, I would think. Now, is there a chance that the head coach hire pulls someone like Khan away? Potentially. This thing's going to be going on throughout the Senior Bowl process, I would think. They're not going to make a hire in the next, 5-6 days, I wouldn't think. And so, yeah, maybe we just see Weidel and then a bunch of scouts. And so that's how this thing could look very different. Of course, there will be no Steelers assistants coaching at this thing. They have the Coach Up program where assistant coaches get to help with the American team and the national team. And, this year there were no Steelers on the list. And that's partially because, well, right now there are no Steelers assistants because they were basically told all of you guys need to seek a job. And so they're maybe too busy to be out here doing this kind of side quest thing. They're looking for new jobs. And so I understand that. But that is all going to be a little bit different from years past. Keep in mind that the Arthur Smith hire did happen during the Senior Bowl a couple of years ago. I think it was like right at the beginning that news broke. And so maybe we see the same thing happen again. Maybe late next week when Chris Shula and Nate Shieldhouse have come in for an in-person. That's kind of when they start making the decision. Thoughts and prayers to our Alex Kozora if that happens, because the rest of us will be predisposed at the All-Star games, and he's going to have a heck of a lot of work on his plate if that happens. But on to the actual players to watch. I wanted to just highlight in specific quarterbacks and wide receivers. Not because there aren't, plenty of other talents at other positions. Those are just the two most important positions to me in this draft cycle for the Steelers. Wide receivers, it's obvious. The Steelers have been looking for a receiver forever. For a while it was opposite Pickens. Now it's opposite DK Metcalf. And, you can pick your mold of a wide receiver you'd like. Do you want the route runner? Do you want the big guy? Do you want the contested catch guy? I mean, if you look at DK Metcalf, he's a big body. He should be a contested catch guy. He hasn't really proven to be that. And so to me, I think, you could look at either of the above of what I just said. Maybe a shiftier, maybe a slot, outside, hybrid kind of like route running guy. Or you could look at some of the big bodies. There's all of the above going to be in attendance in Mobile. To me, some of the most impressive names on the list that I'll be looking at closely. Casey Concepcion is one of the big ones out of Texas A&M. He's also one of the youngest in this class. I think he actually is the youngest of the Senior Bowl wide receivers at just a little bit over 21 years old. Only 3 years in college. He played 2 at NC State before going to Texas A&M for his final year. And he pretty much burst onto the scene right away as a freshman. He ended up consensus All-American for all-purpose in 2025. In just 3 years, he caught an impressive 185 passes for 2,218 yards and 25 touchdowns. So he's definitely one of the guys I will be keeping a close eye on. I think he's going to be the first guy I do a scouting report on for the site. Those should be starting on SteelersDepot.com. I think over this weekend, we'll have our first scouting reports of the year rolling out. And so keep an eye for those for sure. Concepcion is a guy who mostly plays on the outside, but he also logged over 200 slot snaps in 2025. So a guy who can kind of play inside and out, 5'11", 190. So he's not, a huge body, but, that's a body that's capable of playing anywhere with the right skill set. And he looks like one of those guys that could be that. Another Indiana's Elijah Surratt. Anyone who watched the national championship heard his name quite a few times and throughout the year on this Indiana Hoosiers run. 6'2", 213 pounds. He's probably a late first, early second kind of guy. He could be a riser throughout the process depending on how things go for him. He played mostly on the outside. This was his 4th season, and he ended up with 44 touchdowns throughout college. And actually, did he get one yesterday? Because I wrote this before yesterday. So if he had another touchdown there, sorry about that to him. But obviously, he had the benefit of playing with Fernando Mendoza this past year, which is significant. That's projected number 1 overall pick there. So, but Surratt at 6'2", that's a guy who really could fit the mold of just about anything for the Steelers. That's a big enough body to be a red zone threat, and he was reliable enough on kind of a moving the chains down-to-down basis for them as well. Jacoby Lane, USC wide receiver, that's another big body, 6'4", and this is a guy who had a knack for making just very, very impressive, spectacular catches. He became an end zone threat, 18 touchdowns in 3 seasons there, and he really had a ton of touchdowns. I think it was last year. He kind of fell off in that department this year, but he upped his yard production this year, and so I think he kind of became a more well-rounded receiver in 2025, despite the touchdown dip. He could easily end up a top candidate on the Steelers' radar, I would think. And all three of these names you're probably going to see linked to the Steelers on mock drafts. Speeding through the last couple here, actually, I just want to highlight this one because he's a smaller school guy. Georgia State wide receiver Ted Hurst is somebody that's interesting to me. 6'3", 195. He was 2 years at Valdosta State before transferring to Georgia State for his final 2. And he caught 187 passes for almost 3,000 yards and 25 touchdowns. Very productive throughout college, albeit against lesser competition. But at his size and with that type of production, that's a guy worth keeping an eye on. I think he's kind of projected to be more of like maybe a third, fourth round kind of guy. But those small school guys have a penchant for kind of rising on the draft board with strong performances at the Senior Bowl and at the Combine. I think of guys like who was it? Jalix Hunt a couple years ago. Was that his name? The Eagles pass rusher. He rose at the boards. He was a small school guy that I had circled at the a couple years back. So maybe a similar player in Ted Hurst there. I'm going to keep a close eye on him. As far as quarterbacks, we'll have to see if Garrett Nussmeier shows up. LSU quarterback, he has a potential to be, with how weak this quarterback class is, one of the better quarterbacks on the board, honestly. Which says more about the class, I think, than him himself. But this is a guy that had a ton of hype coming into 2025. I think he had injuries that hampered him pretty much all year. He had a core injury that he was battling, and then he had an ankle. And so is this a guy that is finally healthy and finally can show us what we were excited about entering 2025? That's the question I'm excited to see at the Senior Bowl. I saw something maybe about him potentially backing out, so hopefully that isn't the case. Some other guys, Taylon Green, quarterback out of, is that Arkansas, I believe. He's an interesting prospect just because of his physical build and more than anything. This is a guy who is 6'6", 235 pounds. He has long speed. He can really get going. I mean, he had, I'm trying to see if I have it pulled up here. Yeah, he had 2,405 rushing yards on 459 attempts with 35 rushing touchdowns in college. So this is a true dual threat kind of guy, and at his size, that's intriguing. His big issue is the fact that he threw 35 interceptions. He might be a little bit inaccurate at times, and so that's going to be something worth watching. I think back to a couple years ago, Joe Milton at the Senior Bowl. He was that hyper-athletic, huge arm prospect who could run, but unfortunately, his balls were all over the place, often going into the dirt more than they were into his receiver's hands. And so I'm going to be looking at Taylon Green in that way. Diego Pavia needs to be mentioned as well as a runner-up for the Heisman, although he is a shorter guy at 6 even, I think, 207 pounds, and some think he's even shorter than that, what he's listed. So we'll have to see on that when the original measurement comes in. But this is a guy that was very productive. He led Vanderbilt to, a couple of strong seasons, and, the knock on him is he's kind of a one-read guy before he takes off running, so you want to see him kind of go through progressions a little bit. Sorry about the long-winded thing there, but Joe, tell us about some Shrine Bowl stuff. Who's going with you, first of all? Who's the depot crew, and who are you looking at in specific down there?
Be me, Josh Carney, and Dr. Mel. So that was the core of the crew we've been going with every single year. There's been a few people different each year, but for the most part, it's the three of us have been holding on the fort wherever it's been, whether it's been in Vegas or in Frisco. And so, yeah, mostly we're going to be watching, or I'm going to be watching quarterbacks and receivers, same as you. Me and Josh always get caught up watching O-line, D-line, so there will be a lot of that as well. Dr. Mel always finds a hidden gem at running back, and sometimes in the DB room. So we'll be all over the place. We kind of split it up just to make sure we're not watching too many of the same guys and we can get a fair eval on everybody. But with quarterback and receiver obviously being the biggest needs on paper for the Steelers this year, that's where the focus is going to lie. And at receiver, the one guy that intrigues me probably the most is Skylar Bell from UConn. He had 101 catches last year, over 1,200 yards and 13 touchdowns. He's probably the highest ranked receiver who's going to be down there. He's probably a top 100 prospect. Along with him, Malik Benson from Oregon. He had a big college football playoff. He started his career at Alabama, went to Florida State. I think he had 2 catches against James Madison in the college football playoff opener. He had over um, 700 yards and 6 touchdowns for the Ducks this year. Another guy that stood out in the playoffs was John Stribling from Ole Miss. He had 811 yards and 6 touchdowns this season. He had 7 for 122 against Georgia and 5 for 77 against Miami in the playoffs. So he really showed up for them late. He's 6'2", 210. He's pretty physical. Excited to see how he looks. One name that intrigues me just because the Steelers scouted this team a little bit this year. We tracked throughout the season, as we always do, where the Steelers have their scouts on Saturdays. And they were at BYU pretty often. BYU has Chase Roberts. He's probably a day 3 pick. He's an older prospect at 25 years old, as a lot of BYU prospects are. So he did a 3-year mission. Um, BYU obviously had a lot of success this year. He was a big part of that. 54 catches, 802 yards, and 6 scores. And then one other name on the receiver list that's also intriguing is Chris Hilton. Eric Galko, who runs the Shrine Bowl, said he thinks he could be this year's kind of breakout as Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt was last year at the Shrine Bowl. He said he thinks it could be Chris Hilton this year. He's a straight line speed burner, deep threat. Somebody we'll definitely have our eyes on. Again, probably a later round guy as it stands right now, but somebody to watch. There's a pretty solid receiver corps down there, so there'll be plenty of names to watch. And then as far as quarterbacks go, Cade Klubnik is probably the biggest name. He obviously was getting first round consideration before this year, but he struggled. The Tigers and Clemson really struggled. So Klubnik's stock is probably late day 2 at best. If he really shines throughout the pre-draft process, he's probably looking at going day 3. But he's a guy that was mocked to the Steelers a lot ahead of the season, so a name maybe to potentially watch there. The name that intrigues me the most is Joe Fagnano from UConn. He only threw 1 interception this year, threw for 3,448 yards and 28 touchdowns. Obviously, Skylar Bell was his number 1 receiver, so 2 of them will be paired up again down there. He's spent 7 years in college. He started his career at Maine at the FCS level before, really turning things around at UConn. It's hard to make UConn a competitive program, and I mean, they just got Jamore left. They got Jason Candle, who's one of the, who's been a hot coach on the market. So the work that Fagnano did at UConn has really kind of revived the program a little bit. I'm also intrigued by Baron Morton. He had a good year at Texas Tech. He probably is more of a backup at the NFL level, more of a short to medium accuracy guy. He doesn't really have the deep ball, and he struggled in the college football playoff against Oregon. But another name out there that's pretty intriguing. A few other names that I'm intrigued to see is Daryl Jackson. He's a D lineman at Florida State. He spent 5 years in school. He's a big body. He's 6'5". I think he's over 300 and or he's 6'6". 274. So he's a big, jacked up kind of edge defensive lineman. Who knows what the Steelers are going to be going for? The Steelers, have usually gone for guys with pretty long arms, and I think he fits that bill right now. He's a like, strong side defensive end, can play defensive tackle. Caden Wetchen's another receiver I wanted to mention just because he's a return specialist. He led the nation in kick return yards last season, 2024, and then he's led the nation in punt return yards each of the last 2 years. He has 6 career return touchdowns, so the Steelers could be looking for a return specialist. Their kick return game has been awful ever since the new return rules have gone into effect. So another guy I'm kind of intrigued about there. And then Dante Corleone, who has just caught my eye. Obviously, the name, his nickname is the Godfather. He's been highly productive at UC this year. He battled injuries. He only played in 10 games, and when he did play, he wasn't as productive. But this is a guy that's had over 5 tackles for a loss and 3 sacks in the 3 years prior. So I'm really intrigued to see how he looks down there. And then the last one is Riley Nowakowski. He probably won't do much down there because he's at Indiana. So it's kind of the same deal as Surratt if he shows up. Um, Hopefully he does, but if he does, he probably won't be doing a lot. But he's kind of that hybrid fullback tight end sort of role that a lot of teams have been looking for. And if the Steelers do want to, really implement a fullback into their roster this year, I think he would be a pretty solid candidate. So those are just a brief rundown there, but we'll have plenty more throughout the week. We'll have practice write-ups every day. We'll have a primer coming on Friday before practice starts of 15 players to watch. We're working through primers ahead of time, just highlighting each position group. So there'll be a lot more content coming to you over the next week.
And of course, player interviews will be flooding in once
Yep.
we're down there on site. As always, those are always interesting. Even if they don't have a Steelers slant, these things have a way of popping back up into relevance. It seems like every time the Steelers sign off-season roster guys, we're pulling up interviews that we had with them from past events and scouting reports that we had from on these guys like 4 or 5 years ago in some cases. And so these things have a way of paying off one way or another, whether it's right away or down the road. So we hope you guys will tune in for all of that. I think we're going to wrap up the show now with our listener question. This one from Brett in San Angelo. Now, I don't know how far San Angelo is from Frisco, but maybe you guys can get dinner with Brett or something.
Hello, Depot Dive. This is Brett from San Angelo, and I was looking at the list of outgoing Steelers free agents, reviewing that article. Was very impressed with the writer. However, I did want to question or campaign perhaps for a couple more, shall we say, under the radar potential re-signings. The first one is Andres Pete. Now, on the surface, you have Spencer Anderson, but if Sam signs somewhere else, it may make more sense for the Steelers to draft a guard to replace him and keep Spencer Anderson in that extra lineman reserve role. And oftentimes they like a veteran placekeeper. Pete looks good at left guard, and if he is ultimately replaced as a veteran, would be perfectly fine in a reserve role as the season wore on, and the price should be right. So I'd like your thoughts on that. Then the second one is Scotty Miller. I say that because this team had kept to keep Miller active to have a backup punt returner. Now, assuming Austin ultimately leaves, while I think that Roman Wilson is a perfectly good replacement at slot receiver, the question is they didn't seem to want him to return punts. So do you keep Scotty Miller as veteran insurance backup for Roman Wilson and as special teams punt returner? Love to hear your thoughts, and I'll shut up and listen to the answer.
All right, Brett, with some roster questions about the free agency primer that I put out. When was that? I guess a week ago. It seems like a year ago at this point with everything going on. But talking specifically about a couple, Andres Pete being one of them, and what to do with him. Is he a re-sign candidate? And maybe what to do with Scotty Miller. Joe, I'll let you pick one to talk about, and I'll talk about the other.
Yeah, I'll go with Pete. I don't think he's going to be a priority for this team to bring back. I mean, they signed him in August last year after he sat out in free agency. He might want to retire at this point. He's been in the league a long time, so it's even a matter of if he wants to play again. And if he does, then I think you can probably find a better, younger option out there. I mean, he does have versatility, but I don't think he's a guy that this team's going to prioritize bringing back until, maybe he'll come back during training camp like he did last year and then see what happens. But I mean, it's a new coaching staff, and I don't know how attractive Andrews Pete at this point is going to be to a new coaching staff.
Yeah, it's hard to think about. It's hard to even conceptualize what the roster could look like. Sans, Tomlin, and really everybody. I mean, you're talking about Arthur Smith, Terrell Austin, all the assistants potentially being gone, and what that does to the roster. I mean, we're going to expect pretty significant shakeup, I would think. It's already been significant shakeup the last couple of years, and certainly this year should be even more. And so some of these fringe guys, I mean, could you make a case for Pete? I suppose. I mean, the real question is, like, are they going to continue leaning into this 13 and jumbo and this kind of thing? The league is trending in that direction, so I don't want to say no. Definitively. I mean, even like Nate Scheelhaus and Chris Shula, the Rams have been doing more of that this year. And so, there is potential for that kind of thing to continue happening. And then if you need a guard in there to make sure that you can keep Anderson at his tackle eligible role, then maybe do talk about Pete. But I don't know. I think they're one step away from kind of completing this line rebuild. And so I'm kind of in favor of them drafting a guard. It wouldn't completely prevent them from bringing Pete back, but that's the direction I'd go. Now for Scotty Miller, kind of the same conversation. It's like if Arthur Smith's gone, that's kind of been the Miller tie for all this time, and I get the punt value, and I get that they seem to like him, but who's they? Who's they that seems to like him? Because they's gone. So I think at this point you have to ask yourself that question first of all, and even the assumptions we've had going back for forever about the Steelers not wanting defensive players to return punts, that isn't an assumption we can really work with anymore. And so do you talk about a guy like Dante Kent or, some of these guys on defense could be potential punt return candidates. So that's kind of where we're at with this whole thinking. I would lean towards no on Scotty Miller, but I could see him being around for the offseason roster. I just don't know if I'd have him making the final 53. And if he did, getting a helmet on game day kind of thing. Hopefully we're not talking about that because hopefully they've upgraded the wide receiver room with 2 or 3 names to kind of push these guys out that are on the bubble or fringe or whatever. Hopefully that's the situation we're talking about. But I think that's all for today's episode. Joe's about to head to Frisco tomorrow, so safe travels to Joe. Follow along with him on Twitter at jclark1233, right? Yes.
Yep.
And Josh Carney at by Josh Carney. I think at Girl Surgeon, I think is Dr. Melanie Friedlander. Follow along with all of them for the latest on Frisco stuff, Shrine Bowl stuff, and then myself and Nate Costco will be at the Senior Bowl. We thank you guys for following along, and we will catch you guys not next week probably, but we might do one next Friday, but we'll let you know. But if not, the week after, we will be talking all things recapping the All-Star games. Thank you, and catch you next time.